In this presentation, we're going to talk about cast preparation, gingival reproduction, dye trimming, and margin identification. Uh, in cast preparation, we're going to talk about cutting dyes, trimming dyes, and different type of margins. So a guideline for good impressions, because we want the impressions to be accurate, so our restoration will fit properly. So the guidelines for good impressions are uniform, homogeneous mix of material. Tray has to be sufficiently filled with the impression material. Thoroughly apply tray adhesive. So the tray adhesive, it's the glue that keeps the impression material inside the impression tray. So before the impression material is applied inside the tray, there is this glue that we paint on, and then we put the impression material, and then the impression is taken into the patient's mouth. The material, the impression material has to be rigid, sturdy. The impression tray also has to be the same size, the correct size for the patient. So if a patient has a small mouth, we are not going to use a large impression trays because we're going to use too much material and makes the patient gag, and therefore the patient is going to move when we put the impression tray inside the patient's mouth. So is not going to be accurate, okay? Also, what we're looking in an impression, no voids or pulls or margin detail. So anytime we receive an impression from the doctor's office, we disinfect, of course, the impressions and everything that comes from the doctor's office, but we have to inspect the impression, especially the margins. So if we see that there are little voids inside the margins, that means the impression is not accurate. So we can call the doctor and say, I'm sorry, doc, but you need to call the patient back and retake the impression, okay? The same can be said also for the digital impression, and sometimes there are certain um, there are certain movements when the doctor takes a digital impression with the scanner. The way the doctor moves the scanner, if he moves it too fast into the patient's mouth, or it goes out of the capturing zone, then there are voids in the impression. So the doctor might say, "Oh yeah, I did a scan of the patient, and I'll send you the scan." But again, you have to check if there are any voids in that scan that you receive, especially when we're talking about the margin and the prep. Okay. Detailed margin, no tears or rough surfaces on the margins. The tray should not show through the impression material. So the impression material has to have a certain thickness. So when the patient bites down, the teeth doesn't go all the way through the impression material to hit the tray. Okay. A good blend between the heavy body and light body of the impression material, a strong bond between the impression material and the tray, especially using that tray adhesive. No tooth contact with the tray. So like I said, the the teeth, they should have contact with the impression material and not with the tray. If the tooth goes all the way through the tray, that means the impression is not accurate. And complete information about the impression used to provided to the lab. Okay, so we have to know what kind of impression materials the dentist uses. Why is that important? Like we said before, if the dentist uses, let's say, alginate material, that material is going to lose water very fast, and therefore it's going to distort. It's not going to be accurate, so we have to put it right away. Also, if we're using any other type of impression materials, all of them, they have expiration date. So let's say a dentist take a final impression, he send it to us, but we get busy, we working on different cases, and we forgot for 2 weeks to put up that impression. That impression is not accurate no more. So we have to talk to the dentist to take another impression, and they're not going to be happy about it. Okay. Disinfecting the impressions. So when you're receiving the cases from the dental office, all items, they should be soaked in iodophor. Okay, so make sure you disinfect everything that comes. The bite registration, if the doctor sends you also the face bowl, that should be you know um, disinfected. Everything has to be disinfected. Inspecting the models and dies. So after pouring the models, carefully inspect the dies and models for bubbles, voids, drag marks, etc. Especially pay attention to the prep area, the preparation area, and the margins. Do not accept or proceed with the case if defect or voids are present. Okay, call the doctor to discuss the case and retake the impression. So those are some of the problems that we see. So there is poor bond between the heavy body and the light body material in the first picture. So that means that material is moving during the patient, when the patient took the impression, and it's not accurate. Also, we can see that there is a contact with the impression tray. So we said that the there shouldn't be any parts of the tray that touches the patient gums or teeth, especially the teeth and the preparation. The separation of the material from the tray. So that's an important um, feature that we have to be aware of. Why? Because when we pour up the impression, right, and we take it apart, it might break that impression. So if we need to do an extra cast, let's say uncut cast, then we cannot use that impression no more. Tearing at the margins, so we can see that the margin is not accurate in that picture with the purple light body material. So if we continue with this case over there, the margin is going to be open. That's a big problem. The same of the next picture where we see that the margin is not very well visible. So in a case like this, either the dentist has to put a cord to separate the gum from the margin, so the margin is more exposed, and then when he takes the impression, the margin shows up in the impression material more accurately. So die trimming and margin identification, okay? So the die trimming meaning removing the excess material, all right? So think about it when we have a die, right? What we see the first time when we take it up from the model, we take it out and we look at it, we see where the gum is, right? So sometimes the doctors may put the margin above the gum line, sometimes they might put it at the gum line, sometimes they might put it under the gum line. So in order for us to be able to see the margin and to fabricate a restoration that has the margin sealed, we have to remove the excess stone that is around the margin. So that's called trimming, okay? So remove each die from the model, place in order or mark the tooth number on each die for identification. And this is very easy to do and very good. Why? Because sometimes, let's say, you're working on the posterior cases and the preps, they're looking very similar to each other. So you might have a die that fits on the right side and the one from the right side fits on the left side, and then if you switch it around, it's a completely different case. Okay, so marking the tooth number on each die, it's essential. Okay, if the die does not come easily, trim the excess stone on the mesial and distal sides below the margins of the preparation. So whatever you do at this point, do not touch the margin, okay? We just want to have a easy removal of the dye from the model. So adjust it accordingly, just trim a little bit of that excess material, but don't make the dye too weak. Okay. Use small barrel stone, safety glasses, and suction and mask to trim the excess tissue away from the dye to expose the margin. Okay. So this is kind of getting us closer to the margin. So this is trimming. Now ditching is exposing the margin. So actually ditching is the process in which we grind the stone and we have the margin showing. So we can use a pear-shaped carbide um, to do the margin. You can use the link on that video to see how the trimming and ditching is done. But very important, when we do the trimming, go at low speed. If necessary, use a smaller burr, and make sure you don't chip the margin, because you gotta start all over again with pointing up the impression and do all the model work. So the ditching is to expose the margin, okay? So in order for us to identify where the margin is and to know where to finish the preparation, we have to see the margin. So once we ditch it and we kind of have an idea where the margin is, in order for us to be able to see it constantly when we're working on it, we have to use a pencil to mark it, okay? Please do not use a graphite pencil like a regular lead pencil that you write with in your notebooks. Those are contaminating. So when we're gonna do the when you can do the work for the wax up and casting and or pressing or whatever, that's gonna create voids and problems into your casting. Okay, so don't use the lead pencil. Use the ones that you have in school, the blue and red. You can use either the blue side or the red side to mark your margins so you can identify the margin and see it when you start working and do your wax up. Um, so like I said, for the ditching, you can use a small round carbide burr like number 8 to go and cut a channel underneath the margin and around the margin to expose where the margin is, okay? Margin identification is the junction line between the tooth and the restoration, okay? So there are different type of margins. We have a chamfer margin, a shoulder. If you look at the chamfer and shoulder margins, they're very similar, only that the shoulder margin is more like a 90-degree angle, like more like a straight angle. The chamfer is more rounded. The bevel and the knife edge margins, they're all a little bit similar in the sense that the margin, it's not so pronounced, okay, like you see in the shoulder and the chamfer. Usually the knife edge or the bevel margins are used when the margin is placed under the gingiva, okay? So again, different presentations of the margins. So feather margin or knife edge margin, it's kind of similar. Okay, so we see that it's really not very well defined, like we see it in the chamfer margin or the shoulder margin. And also there are indications for different type of restoration, what kind of margin should be used. So for instance, for all ceramic restorations, like we do in our class, the feather edge or the knife edge or the bevel is not recommended. And why is that? Because the material that we use for the final restoration, even though it's a strong material, when it's very, very thin, it breaks. It's very brittle. It's glass-like material, so it can shatter very easily. So for this type of restoration, we rather have either a chamfer or a shoulder type of margin because that gives more stability and um, you know, makes the margin more robust between the margin of the preparation and the margin of the um, restoration. So again, shoulder margin or butt joint. So we see that the difference between the shoulder and the chamfer is that the shoulder it's more angled, more 90-degree angle. Shoulder is more rounded. I'm sorry, the chamfer is more rounded. And with the bevel margin, like I said, it's a very good type of margin, especially used for metal substructures. If we do a metal coping and the patient has, margin subgingival under the gum, that will be an indication for a bevel margin. Open and short margins. So the gap between the margin of the prepared tooth and the restorations, that's the open margin. And why is that important not to have, and we go through all this trouble to have the margins match the restoration margin with the restoration, with the prep margins to match? Because we want to seal that margin, right? We don't want any opening, any gaps between the margins because, first of all, the cement that the doctor uses for inserting the restoration in time is washing off, okay? So little by little, parts of that cement may come loose. Also, the gap creates area where the food and bacteria can be trapped. The patient can clean there. So, the food gets trapped inside, patient cannot clean in there. That's a recipe for another cavity under the crown. And then the patient comes in and screams at the doctor, you did this crown for me a year ago, and now how I have a cavity underneath the gum, underneath the crown. So that's a big problem. So we want to make sure that the margins are sealed with each other. Okay. And also we want to make sure that the crown is fully seated to avoid short margin. So sometimes, depending on the type of preparation that the doctor did on the tooth, they have to make sure that they insert the crown in a certain position so it's seated properly. Many times, a good dentist, before he or she cements the crown in, they try in the crown and they take an x-ray. And at the x-ray, they see if the margin of the restoration it's sealed, it's matching with the margin of the preparation. If there is any gap in there, he's going to take the crown out and send it back to us to redo it. Okay? So make sure that after you finish the crown, you put the crown back in the model in the position that it's supposed to go in, and make sure that the margins are matching. Okay? So in some cases, it's recommended that the soft tissue around the preparation or the dyes should be more made of the soft material mimicking the natural gingiva instead of the hard stone. And especially this is viable for cases, like I said, where the margin is placed under the gum. So if we want to see, let's say the doctor asks us to do a porcelain fused to metal and have the margin left in metal, right? We want to see where to finish that metal and start the porcelain for aesthetic purposes. So having this soft tissue gum, right, we can take that out from the model, finish the margin, and then put back the soft tissue so we see how it's going to look in the patient's mouth with the gum. Okay. Also, just as a side note, um, in majority of the cases, the implant cases, we're using soft tissue. Okay. So this is a very good material. It's a silicone-based material. It could be either silicone-based or it can be now 3D printed material, or it can be acrylic, and it's used as a paint-on method. Okay. So um, materials and equipment, there are different types of gingival mask materials, such as self-curing acrylic paint-on method that has monomer and polymer, silicone-based soft gingiva that comes through a dispensing gun, and 3D printing resin for soft tissue. And again, when we start printing up, if we use printing system, we have to use the printed system, the resin that comes with that system, okay, for better accuracy. So the procedure goes like this. At first, the impression is sprayed with a separator to separate the impression from the gingival mask material called GI mask. Once the separator dries, the gingival mask material is injected directly into impression from a special gun-like instrument with the mixing tips. Then um, the gingival material, it's left set. It's set fairly quickly, and then we can put up the impression in stone. Um, One important aspect when we do the soft tissue material, we have to be careful when we dispense the material to not go with that material all over the place. So we don't want to go into the adjacent teeth. We don't want to bring it all the way to the sulcus. We want to kind of keep it nice and neat in the area that we need it. No, don't put extra. All right. So the prepared areas in the impression are left alone so the stone can fill them up and the technician can work on the dies. Once the GA mask cures or it sets, the impression is poured in die stone, and when the impression is separated from the model should come out with that gingival mask in there. So it should be attached to the model. Once the stone hardens, the model is removed from the impression. The gingival mask can be taken off the model at this point and gently shape it with the burrs if necessary. If you are careful enough when you inject the material and not put it all over the place, then you shouldn't have to do too much trimming afterwards. The gingival mask can be also removed so the models can be articulated and dies cut for easy removal. As the technician builds up a restoration, the gingival mask can be utilized during build-up or it can be taken off the model so we can see the accuracy of the margin. So this is in pictures how the gingival mask is done. So the impression is sprayed with a separator, then the gingival mask is applied inside the impression in the areas that we want to be. Also make sure that you don't put it all over the place and don't go into the adjacent teeth if it's not necessary. Okay, and then we can pour up the stone, letting completely set, and once we separate the model from the impression, we should have the gingival reproduction set into the model. If we need to trim it, we can use, there are special burrs that can be used to trim it, or also a very sharp blade can be used to be trimmed for trimming. Okay, so once the restorations are finished and placed back into the tissue model, the technician can have a better picture of how the final restoration would look in the patient's mouth and get the natural tissue. So we can see actually the margins, how the margins are well covered by the gum. And also, like I said, it's very important for more complicated cases. Okay, so if you have any questions, please ask me. All right, thank you.